Welcome to my channel. Today we will have a look at the FIDE World Cup round 3, and this is a very exciting one. This is Vidit versus Adhiban. If you don't know Vidit or Adhiban already, Vidit is quite well known. He has like almost 200k subscribers on YouTube. He's India's number 2 and the world's number 22, so he's definitely one of the top super GMs out there. And then with the black pieces we have Adhiban, aka the Beast, which I believe is the world's number 80 if you go and have a look at the FIDE rankings. And this is their game number 1. We have d4. And what we have by black is a very interesting choice. Usually in this format what you do is you try to hold the draw with black and try to win the game with white, because that's what usually happens at the top level, but not for Adhiban. I mean, he's called the Beast for a reason. What he does is he goes all out and he plays what is probably the most aggressive opening against d4, which starts with knight f6, c4, g6, planning to go into a King's Indian defense with blacks. We have g3, and this is now the fianchetto variation of the King's Indian defense. Bishop g7, bishop g2, castles, knight c3 and d6. Knight f3, knight c6, and now castles. And in this very position, the main idea is to go for this at first sight pretty strange looking plan of going a6 and rook b8, and usually also followed up by the move b5, trying to take some space. And this makes a lot of sense since this bishop is really looking along this diagonal, and so it makes a lot of sense for this rook to step aside. And this is also what Adhiban goes for. He goes for a6 with this plan. We have bishop f4, which is one of the moves you can play in this position. There's a lot of different options. You can go for something like h3, you can go for something like e4, rook e1, queen c2. Another option you have is to go b3, which would be a double fianchetto, but in this very position, Vidit goes for this one, which is also a standard move in this position. Also, after the game, Vidit pointed out that Adhiban had some really deep opening preparations, so the following moves we will see are all prepped. And Vidit said that he had to think a lot in the opening because he was not exactly sure on what to play. So what do we have? Rook b8, rook c1, developing all of their pieces. A move you could play in the position is trying to get some space on the queen side with this move, b5. But instead what Adhiban goes for is h6, which is protecting this square on g5, which is a very important square in the King's Indian. After the move d5, usually what you do in these types of structures is you play the move knight to a5, pressurizing this pawn on c4. But in this case, after b3, c5, now this position is a little bit better for white, so something that could happen is something like takes on c6, knight takes, and now a very nice move, knight to d5, putting the knight in the center of the board. Really, white has a lot more space than black has, and it's simply way easier to play with a lot of room for the pieces. So in actual fact, Adhiban goes for another move which is tactically possible due to the fact that this bishop is standing on f4. So what Adhiban goes for is e5, attacking the bishop. And now Adhiban asks the question to Vidit, well, which piece do you value the most? My knight or your bishop? Vidit says, I value my bishop most. Also, white doesn't really want to trade pieces, right? Because black is more cramped and it would make black's life easier. Knight to d4 now, and this is a very nice move. This is a very standard idea in the King's Indian, and the idea is that if the knight takes, the pawn takes back, and this position is actually pretty good for black. You know, this weak pawn on d4 might fall eventually, but in actual fact that makes this dark square bishop on g7 even stronger. Also note, since the pawn has moved from the e5 square, now the e5 square can be used by black's pieces, usually the knight. So this is not what Vidit goes for. Instead what he does is he plays this move, which is knight to e1. He simply doesn't want to trade, he wants to keep all of the minor pieces on the board in order to create as much chances for himself to win this game as possible. c5, a very nice move, stabilizing this knight and also making sure that this pawn on c7 isn't a backward pawn any longer. But of course, there's still a rule in chess called en passant, which means that in this case, white can take on c6, simply like this, and the pawn takes back. And now what do we see? Right now we have a half open b and d file, and also note that the diagonal a8, h1 has opened up. e3 kicking back the knight and knight to e6. In the game, Vidit made the decision to simply take that pawn, and Adhiban took the pawn on b2. Knight e3 attacking the rook, and the rook goes back. The bishop goes back, and now h5, preparing something like h4 and takes, or pushes to h3. Knight d5, putting the knight in the very center of the board. Bishop b7, and now bishop to c3. I think that's clear that white has pretty much optimized all of his pieces. Both of these pieces are pretty much standing on their best possible squares, as well as this knight, right, in the very center of the board on the d5 square. But also from the black perspective, I mean, these knights look pretty cute, as well as this bishop on this long diagonal, and this bishop is pretty standardly placed on the g7 square. This position is pretty much equal. Maybe white is slightly better. I mean, generally speaking, black doesn't really have any problems or any specific targets for white, except for maybe this pawn, which looks a little bit weird, but for now is well defended, as well as this backward pawn on d6, which is of course a weakness, but just like h6, it's well controlled by now. I think it's clear that the biggest asset in the game is this hole on d5, which is currently used by the white's knight. In this position, Adhiban thought for 10 minutes and then played this move, which is e4. Vidit thought for a moment and he thought, well, what? Isn't this pawn hanging on e4? He simply took the knight, the bishop took back, and he takes the pawn. Adhiban basically blundered the pawn. It's not just the pawn, right? It's the center pawn. It's the pawn on e5, which is controlling a lot of squares, and it's really making the black's position way more stable. Now in the game, which is pretty funny, according to Vidit, I saw his interview, is what he said is he pretended like nothing happened, and he started simply blitzing out moves. Apparently he immediately played h4. And I think that's probably also the best thing that you can do after blundering something, is just pretending like nothing happened and confusing your opponent a little bit. And now what I want you to do is focus a little bit more on the white pieces and how Vidit will coordinate all of his pieces to work very well together. So we have rook to b1, putting the rook on the open file, which makes a lot of sense. The bishop goes back to g7 and the bishop goes back to g2. Vidit is up a pawn, so the only thing he needs to do is to simply be solid, make sure that all of his pieces are on the best possible squares, and afterwards try to exploit the targets in the black position. And I'm mostly talking about these pawns, rook to e8 and now queen to g4. A very nice developing move, because also the queen needs to get active. H takes on g3 and h takes back, and now queen to a5. Black's also developing his queen. And now Vidit tries to double the rooks on the b file, just like this. So this is what he goes for. And now, since this move rook to b1 is going to be played, pressurizing all of these pieces, Adhiban decides that it's time right now to simply take off this knight. Okay, now I want you to pause the video and try to imagine what Vidit played in this position. Would Vidit take back with the bishop or with the pawn? So try and come up with the right answer. Okay, and this is actually very important to now take back with the bishop for several reasons. You don't really want to take back with the pawn, because then this pawn structure would be fixed. And also there's a problem for this bishop, because now he's simply looking at this pawn. Even though it might look nice because now you're attacking the knight, in actual fact, positionally speaking, this would be a mistake. What you want to do is you want to take back with the bishop, making sure that this bishop keeps his activity on this long diagonal. And maybe more importantly, as I said later on with white, we want to exploit this weakness. And so what we want to do is we want to keep it weak. What happened now is knight to c7 attacking the bishop, and the bishop steps back. Attacking the rook, rook takes, pawn takes, and rook to b8 attacking the pawn. And now Vidit played a very nice move, b4. And this is very well possible because it's supported by the knight on d3. Queen a3. And seemingly like the black's queen is getting active in the white's position, and there might be a lot of weak pieces and pawns in the position, but Vidit handles this position really well. Simply rook to d1. defending the knight. Queen to b3, the rook is attacked and simply bishop back. And as you can see, this position is extremely solid. Why is this solid? Because like all of the pawns and the pieces are protected by each other, and it's very difficult for black to try and exploit these weaknesses. So by now, white has pretty much stabilized his position. Queen to c2. And now again, a move that I like so much is simply king to g2. Simply developing the last piece in the position, because also it's stopping some possible tactics later on, including the back rank. Bishop f8, rerouting the bishop. And now I want you to closely look at how all of these pieces, the white's rook, knight and queen, will eventually, in 10 or 15 moves, become extremely active and well coordinated. So first of all, what Vidit does is he puts his queen in the center of the board, which makes a lot of sense. Like, the range of this queen is so high, it's looking at all of these squares in this position, and this makes black's life really difficult. In the game, knight to e6 was played, but now simply queen a7, attacking the rook and the pawn at the same time. What does black do about it? I mean, nothing. There's simply nothing to do, because this position is extremely solid, all of these pieces are defending each other, and the queen is simply highly active. So what to do about it? Well, nothing. I mean, Vidit simply goes on to win another pawn. Knight to g5, attacking the bishop. What we would have done in this position is probably move the bishop, but now Vidit says like, okay, I've really had it with this queen on c2. It's too annoying, so what I'll do is simply get that queen out of here. Knight to e1, very nice move, because after queen f5, now putting the queen back to c6, rook e5, now the knight goes back to d3, since the black queen is now no longer in the white's position. The rook is attacked, and so the rook goes back. Queen to d5, asking for a queen trade. Queen to h3, it seems that it's doing a lot of stuff, but in actual fact, it's only one check, and after king to g1, bishop h6, now a very strong move by Vidit, knight to f4. And what did I tell you about the coordination of the white rook, queen, and knight? As you can see, they're all optimized, right? The knight is attacking the black queen, and the white's rook and queen are exploiting this weakness on d6. Queen c8. This pawn on d6 is extremely weak, but for now, this bishop on f3 is hanging since it's attacked by the black knight. What Vidit does is simply bishop to g2, and in this very position, Adhiban, aka the Beast, had to resign the game. And so why is this position so strong for the white pieces? First of all, there are some threats in the position, like takes on d5, but also moves like knight takes on g6, right? Since this pawn is pinned to the black king. And also white could decide to either push this pawn or to simply go for something like b5, b6 and b7, followed by something like rook to a1 and rook to a8, and this is completely lost for black. So I think this was an extremely nice game, positionally speaking, by Vidit. Unfortunately for Adhiban, he lost this pawn at the start of the game, and I'm really looking forward to their game number 2, because now Adhiban has the white pieces. Once again, he will go all out, he will play some sharp stuff, because he's now in a must-win situation. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope you enjoyed this game as much as I did. If you like this video, please subscribe to my channel. That would really mean a lot to me. And with that said, I hope to see you guys in the next one. Bye!